Welcome to the lecture on understanding global value chains and trade in value added. In this lecture, we'll study the basic ideas behind these two concepts, the rationale behind emergence of global value chain, or what we call in short GVC, different definitions, analytical approaches to understand these two concepts, etc. We will also study the importance of measuring trade in value added in this lecture. So the lecture is divided into 5 parts. We'll start with the understanding of globalizations and its relation with GVC. Different types of GVCs will be discussed in this section. In the second part, we will understand the emergence of GVCs and analytical approaches, different typologies. And in the third part, our focus will be on mapping GVCs and how to measure GVCs through different methods. In section 4, the trade in value added will be discussed, that how the intermediate goods trade become more important, and we can try to understand whether the existing trade statistics are sufficient enough to measure the trade in value added. In the last part, we will understand, or we will make an attempt to understand, that what is the impact of COVID-19 on GVCs, whether the GVCs are still resilient or there's a new dimension of GVC emerging. So what is a GVC? A GVC breaks up the production process across countries, with firms specializing in a specific task and stages of production rather than producing the whole product. This is possible due to fragmentation of the production process because of the new technology which permits the fragmentations, and also a significant reduction in the transport cost. So because of a reduction of cost, what we see, there's an economies of scale coming up due to the fragmentation process. Apart from fragmentation, a GVC also leads to an increase in technology and knowledge transfer, as well as capital, as we have observed even foreign direct investment moving to different countries to take the advantage of the fragmented production structure. So let us concentrate on this particular figure, which is a bicycle, and let us try to understand GVC from the production process of a bicycle. As the picture depicts, the bicycle has different parts, and these different parts can be produced in different countries. As the picture says, that several countries are involved in producing components like frames, brakes, wheels. Countries like China, Italy, Spain, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia. So different components are produced in different countries, and finally all these components come to a place and gets assembled. So global value chain actually connects different components, or helps to connect different components, and this is a new form of international trade, what we are observing in 21st century. The concept of value chain is not new. Even the management guru, Michael Porter, who described a value chain as a set of activities that a firm performs to deliver a valuable product or service to the market. Please note, Porter identified not only the products or components, but also the services. So services are the main driver of the value chain. So there could be different components of the value chain, as you can see here in the figure below. Inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics. These are different components. Like in terms of inbound logistics, the farm receives raw materials, and in the operation sections, the raw materials are converted into finished product, and product goes through the distribution channel using the outbound logistic, reaches the retail store, and then finally being sold. So supply chain basically considers three components, but value chain still continues because marketing, sales, after sales service, getting consumer feedback, and how to push consumers to buy more products, advertising, all those basically are important components of value chain. Further, if we try to segregate the supply chain and the value chain, this picture is going to give us a better understanding. So production logistics are mostly under the supply chain part, but the value chain starts much before the production process, like R&D, design, product planning are basically part of the value chain. And again, when the product is delivered, then marketing and services, after sales services are also adding values, so they are also part of value chain. Now from the firm's perspective, these are the activities which need to be monitored, controlled, so that the goods delivered, and there is also a possibility of improving the quality of goods. But now imagine that this process is not limited to the national boundary. Now the companies in different countries are involved in this process. So value chain can cross the border. Another concept, production network. So when we say value chain, the word chain actually explains a sequential activity. So it's a vertical sequence of events leading to the delivery, consumption, and maintenance of a particular good and service. On the other hand, when we say network, this basically takes into account both vertical and horizontal linkages between different agents, economic actors. So in case of value chain, we are thinking of a sequential activities, but in case of network, the kind of a complex set of activities involving both vertical and horizontal linkages are being considered. So in case of production network, the network itself can generate value. So that means firms can think of moving to a new network, so to add values. So when this network is beyond the national boundary, then it becomes International Production Network, or IPN. So literature has identified different shapes of global production network, so which are mostly due to the historical reasons, how the industry developed. This could be because of the technological change, or it could be because of the firm's attention towards a particular activities to be outsourced from a particular location, which may be national, which may be foreign location. So one simple way of describing this is basically a kind of configuration, or rather figurative configurations, like spiders or snakes. So in case of snake, it is basically a sequencing of activities upstream and downstream. In case of spider, just like spider, it is multiple limbs coming together to form a body. So that means is basically I'm talking about horizontal and vertical. So it could be a mix of both. So in that case, some part is sequential and some part is non-sequential. So linear and non-linear kind of linkages. So this picture explains the snakes, spider, and the hybrid one, which we call Sniker. So another way of looking at this thing is basically another kind of a concept called net chain, where it is both network as well as chain of activities. So as you can see, there is a vertical sequencing from suppliers to consumers. So they are at different stages, but at the same time, at each stage, there are horizontal movement also. So here, basically, the network and chain come together, or the concept is popularly known as net chain activities. Let us now concentrate on different uh, kinds of approaches which have been taken up by researchers to understand global value chain. So one of the earlier theories of global value chain focusing on slicing up the production process due to rising transportation and communication service. So Jones and Kirjowski's 1990s paper focus on that, if you slice the production process and do it in different ways, so you can take the advantage of rising, or rather reduce transportation and communication services connecting different locations. The work of Finstra, Hansen, Kampa, and Goldberg, Yates, focusing on trade in intermediate goods. So Finstra's work was mostly that when you are outsourcing the activities which are mostly labor-intensive activities from the developing countries, how the developed country companies will get benefited. Professor Richard Baldwin highlighted the unbundling process. The first unbundling process was due to the reduction in transport cost. Second unbundling process was due to reduction of information and communication cost, which is due to the rapid development of information technology. Apart from that, Grossman and Rosie Onsberg work is trying to highlight how to harness the advantages of higher factor productivity in different locations. From the macro and the trade aspects, if we move towards the firm level, there are several studies which also highlight different aspects of production network. So one of the seminal work by Cherefi, Humphrey, and Sturgeon focusing on governance structures of organizing IPN. Now this work is trying to understand the relationship between the lead firm, and the supplier. More recent work is actually trying to understand how we can measure the trade in value added. And input-output analysis using multi-country input-output tables developed by different agencies are being used. And some work is trying to identify the double counting and separating the foreign value added and the domestic value added and indirect value added in exports. So there are attempts at the macro level, there are attempts at with the trade data and combining trade and input output table, but at the same time there are a lot of survey based studies which were trying to understand the relationship among the firms, and they try to identify several conditions, and the extent of trade and the possibility of success of global value chain depends on the nature of conditions between the lead firm and the suppliers, especially if they are located in different countries. The next slide is going to talk about that. Here, what we try to highlight that the linkage between the lead firm and the supplier could be of different level. At one level, or rather two extreme level, one is completely a market driven, where the lead firm actually is looking for those suppliers who can ensure the right price and the right quality. So it is completely market driven. On the other hand, another extreme could be a completely hierarchy based relation, where there is a significant control on the supplying firm. Apart from that, there could be other type of linkages. It could be modular based linkages, that some modulars can be taken out. It could be a captive relationship, or it could be a kind of a relational module. Now the success of each module depends on certain conditions. And when we look at intra-firm trade across the border, these conditions play a very important role. So the first thing is about the complexity of transactions. If the lead firm demand complex or less standardized products from their supplier, it is difficult for them to exchange necessary information of product specifications with the suppliers. Then actually one structure becomes very important. So if you look at in such case, if it is a less standardized product, then there is not much of question of a specific knowledge to be transferred. So the lead firm can provide us a kind of a specimen by which the supplier firms, or on which the supplier firms work out their cost and the quality and the capability. So they offer a particular price, and it is being and the supplier firm is selected accordingly. So in such cases, the complexity of transactions will be relatively, if the complexity of transaction is relatively less, then market driven mechanism is much more effective. On the contrary, if there is a complexity or higher complexity of transaction, then maybe hierarchical model or captive model becomes more appropriate. Second thing is ability to codify the transaction. Whether it is possible to codify the complex information, and whether lead firm can easily exchange that information with suppliers without any fear of leakage. So you can understand, if it is a hierarchical structure, then there is a total control on the suppliers. Then this fear will be less. On the other hand, the fear will be high if it is a market-driven structure, so there will be fear of leakage. Lastly, the capability in the supply base is also important. The big lead firms, which are mostly multinational, is outsourcing some components or critical components or non-critical components from companies across the border. Now the question is that whether the suppliers are able to increase their supply if the demand of the product goes up. So the capability of the supply base is very important. If it is a completely market driven, then the lead firm may not be having that information. On the other hand, the fear related to the inefficiency of the suppliers, whether they will be able to increase the production base or not, is relatively less when it is a kind of a control environment. So in captive and hierarchical structure, this will be relatively less. So the international trade, the success of global value chain in international trade depends on this particular relation. So governance is a very important aspect for the success of international trade. Another important aspect of global value chain is the capability of upgrading. It provides opportunity to the suppliers for continuous upgrading. It could be a process or product upgrading. It could be also a chain upgrading or functional upgrading. Because the supplier firms is in the global value chain, so it gets a lot of important information which helps them to improve the efficiency of the internal process. So it could be inventory management, it could be efficiency in delivery, it could be the efficiency in any part of their production activities. So process upgrading is a natural aspect. Otherwise, the small farms will be out of the global value chain. So there will be a lot of pressure on them to improve the process. As a farm, they get continuous information from the consumer as well as from the lead farm, which can help the smaller farms who are there in the global value chain, to help them to introduce new products or improve the old products. Sometimes what happens, these small farms can also help in the innovation process of the big firms. So they will become part of the innovation process. Apart from that, small firms can gain a lot of knowledge, and because of that knowledge, they can diversify in another production process for which some common processes are still there. For example, a company which is producing TV monitors can move to produce computer monitors and then to laptop. So it is known as chain upgrading. There could be a functional upgrading as well, in which the firm can upgrade some of the functions like logistics, like accounting function, and it can actually outsource these functions from other firms further, so that they can improve the functional upgrading and they can move from one network in an expanding or more complex network. So this is also an example of upgrading, that how a firm can move to a higher value adding activities, for example, from managing productions to moving to designing the new product, or moving to branding or marketing of the product. Another popular concept in GVC literature is smile curve. So in smile curve, we try to understand the extent of value generated at different level. So you can see the production activities, which is mostly manufacturing and assembly activities. Actually, the level of values generated at this level is relatively low till the logistics part. But more values are there in the activities. Some of them could be service activities before the production process, like innovations, designing, production planning, etc. At the same time, more values are there after the goods are delivered to the customer, which is basically marketing, branding, after sale services, etc. Let us now try to concentrate on the issues how to capture the value additions and what are the attempts in the literature. One of the popular ways of understanding the global value chain is through the farm level survey, or basically um, tracking the values of a particular farm. A famous example is about Apple's devices like iPod and iPhone. Uh, all of us are aware of the fact that these high-tech products are assembled in China, and it contributes a significant contributions in China's exports. And Apple's export from China has um, encouraged many other companies to start outsourcing or doing the final assembly from China. But China actually adds a very small value in the entire iPhones or iPods production chain. So what we have noted that in the value chain, other countries are also involved, such as Germany, Japan, Korea, and other economies. Several studies have been done, and it has been found out that if you are able to separate the values at every stages, then we'll be able to correct the problems of double counting in the gross value of trade. For example, a WTO report calculated that US-China trade balance could be 40% lower if we estimate the data or estimated the trade in value-added terms. Similarly, another study by US ITC showed a 50% reduction in trade between EU15 and China, and also the trade balance between Japan and China could be much lower than what we can see in the gross trade based calculation. So extending the argument further, more explicitly, the iPhone example. This is relatively an old example, but it's still important. So as you can see that the company Foxconn in Shenzhen province, which actually do the assembling, and the components are coming from different countries, could be from US, Korea, Japan, and Germany. in this slide, you can see the major components and the cost drivers to produce Apple's iPhone, and the contributions of different companies located in different countries are given. The total cost of production is around $180, to be precise $178.96, and China's contribution is $6.5, which is just 3.6% of the total cost. So in 2009, China exported 11.3 million units of iPhone to USA. As a result of that, USA had a trade deficit with China close to $2 billion, which is 0.8% of its trade deficit with China at that point of time. But if we calculate it using the concepts of trade in value added, so in that case, China's contribution is only $6.5. So we can multiply $6.5 with 11.3 million units. Then the value comes down to only $73 million. So it is very clear that when the calculation is done on the trade in value added basis, the value goes down significantly from the calculation done by gross export basis. Another approach, apart from the survey and the farm-based approach, is based on input-output tables. So the approach actually combines the input-output tables of various countries and bring trade also in the picture. So there's basically a multi-regional input-output table has been generated. So there's a huge or a big data set which has been created. Theoretically, what we know that through the input-output table, we can track the value added generated at every stages. So we take the advantage of that, and in this process, we'll be able to identify the double counting, and we'll be able to eliminate the double counting. If we're able to eliminate the double counting, then you'll be getting the real picture of the contribution of each country. So in short, there could be three approaches. So one approach which is based on case studies, another approach just looking at the trade through the intermediate goods, and if we know what are the intermediate components of what sector, then we'll be able to connect them. This is mostly using the trade data. And third approach is basically through the multi-regional input-output table. So let us now try to understand the trade in value added more in details. So trade in value added actually is based on an idea of fragmentation of production. So what we have noted that now not the goods, rather than in the production process there are several tasks, and countries are having comparative advantage on those tasks. So what we see, there are super specialization in making components or intermediate goods. So what the world has witnessed is basically a huge growth of trade-in task. This was basically done, or we have reached this kind of stages because of multiple things, both from the demand side as well as from the supply side. There is a significant rise of consumer demand due to globalization, as many countries uh, have witnessed a significant rise in the growth, especially in the emerging countries. At the same time, uh, the globalization pushed many countries to reduce tariffs and other trade barriers. So more goods are being traded. So there is an increased market size, and also it helps the intermediate goods to cross the border easily. Apart from that, there is a significant rise in technology. Countries have invested in export processing zone, and also there are a lot of FDIs which are going from the developed country to the developing country. So this basically make the or help the GVCs to become a reality. So because of this, there is a significant requirement of a new kind of statistics. Because of GVC, the countries need a new dimensions in the trade policy. The current statistics are grossly incompetent in understanding the country of origin and follow um, the trade in value added, because the data is not supporting that. So if there is a new measure which can take into account uh, the, the component trades and link it with the domestic and foreign value added in the exports, then a much clearer picture will be evolved, which can help in developing policies not just for the trade but for the development of the sectors, uh, skill related issues, employment related issues, infrastructure related issues, etc. So this diagram depicts that the the total trade in intermediate goods are much higher than the gross trade in final goods. What we saw in 2000, the distance between the trade in intermediate goods and final goods is much lower, but now actually the gap is very high. The overall trade has come down a bit due to COVID and the overall slowing down, but the gap between the intermediate goods trade and the final goods trade is still very high. So now we'll see the sectoral performance of different intermediate goods in and the final goods in some of the Asia Pacific countries. So if we look at the trade of the transport equipment, so we have seen that the export of the final goods have come down in major exporters of automobiles. For example, in Japan. Also, you can see the same thing in South Korea. And there's also rise of the intermediate goods trade. And the similar thing we can see it in China also. The situation in electronics are more clear. As you can see, the blue bars, which reflect the trade in intermediate goods as a percentage of gross trade, has been very high. And in some cases, for example, in South Korea, it is almost touched the 80%. But overall, the major exporters of the electronic goods, actually the intermediate goods as a percentage of the gross trade is more than 60%. In case of textiles, Japan and South Korea, which exports mostly the machines and fabric, synthetic fabric of man-made fiber. So in those cases, actually trade in intermediate goods are very high. We can see that China and Vietnam, which are exporting the final goods, mostly garments and related things like fabric. So as a result, their trade of final goods are much higher, whereas Japan and Korea are exporting machineries, textile machineries mainly. In case of chemicals, we see the trade in intermediate goods are almost as high as 90%. So now we'll look into the COVID. So COVID-19 has basically ignited and a discussion which is always there in the shadow, which is basically the risk of global production of supply chain, uh, because because lockdown might have influenced um, the global value chain, and the lockdowns are not symmetric. As a result of that, the resilience of the global value chain is affected. However, uh, there is no evidence that economies would have done better uh, without global value chain, because there is a discussion that now it will be more production inside the country, so there will be a drive towards protectionism. But it is important to identify that in recent time there is no evidence, or rather there is lack of evidence that the economies are doing very good without the global value chain. We have also noted that the trade through a trade of the intermediate goods mostly, and uh, and in the global performance of the global value chain started declining from as early as from 2011. And in some cases, we have found out, or rather studies have found out, the length of value chain has been shortened. So what we guess from here, that several activities or tasks which were outsourced earlier are now uh, being consolidated and outsourced from one place. So this looks like an one activity. And also, because of technology, uh, some of the routine jobs or the routine tasks uh, which are being outsourced from a developing countries can be done in the developed country itself, because the new technology through automations and through robotics actually help uh, a kind of a almost like a same quality of products to be produced with almost like a cheaper cost, almost maybe cheaper than the productions which is being outsourced from the developing countries. So when we look at the possible impact of COVID-19 on GVC, we can divide the impact into four possible parts. One is the direct impact, just because of health concerns. Um, Enterprises operating in GVCs production. And this direct effect is not limited to one location. It has have an impact on other location as well. So one country is affected, then it is affecting the other country also because there is a supply chain disruptions, right? So there could be an indirect impact because in the global value chain in one major node is affected, so the other nodes are also affected. Because of COVID, uh, there is also a significant volatility in demand. And as the demand has gone down, the inputs demand have also gone down. So this is also an impact on the supply chain. And in some cases, uh, the firms on the global value chain and predicted a further reduction in the demand. So they reduced or even stopped production of components. So we have observed a worldwide crisis, which is because of sudden stoppage of production. So demand actually having an effect on prediction of demand volatility having an effect on the prediction of future demand. So trade has come down and the investment on the value chain has also come down. So direct impact is having an indirect impact, and it is actually getting accentuated because the demand has become volatile and further less investment is going towards the value chain activities. But if we see that what we discussed as a general phenomenon, but if we see in some cases, actually the global value chain remained very resilient. Some of the sectors which helped people to connect with each other, or what we call the world of online life, so which helped people to get connected through friends, with teachers, with offices. So these are all done through IT and electronics product. So this particular sector remained very, very, kind of a agile in terms of product and service development. Food sector as another sector which has been proven to be quite resilient within the country and across the country. Medical supplies and equipment, initially, there are certain crises because some countries are having ban on the products, but later on, we found that this value chain also remained very resilient. So it is not the case that because of pandemic, everything is destroyed. Some of the sectors remain very, very active and also did a lot of innovations during this time. So what is the way forward? So way forward is basically we can see that GVC may take a different form and it may move with a different speed. So it is true that the GVC what we have experienced may not be having the same dynamics in the coming days. So technology readiness is very important because some of the routine jobs which were earlier been outsourced now being automated. So those jobs or those activities will not come back. So the countries or the companies who are earlier in the global value chain, whether they are able to move up the value chain, so to remain in the new value chain. So the debate of protectionism, uh, which is basically what we say just in time to just in case, because earlier the global value chain was driven by the idea of just in time, so that without wastage of the time the products and the components are being traded. But now the protectionism drive is coming up just in case there is another crisis. So how actually we can maintain a regular supply? And that's why many of the countries and companies are having another sourcing strategy in case there is another crisis. But what we see that those will be much more costly because world has moved to a different level because of reduction in the transport cost and reduction in and also a major achievements in information technology cases. So what is important at this stage that government should support the firms uh, to build more resilient global value chain, understanding in which direction the global value chain is moving, as I just mentioned, that it may not be of the same products, it may not be at the same level. So it is very important to identify the new bottlenecks. It may be a new investment is required, new skill may be required. Okay, so if a country is able to do that, then the value chain will again be resilient and it will see a different dynamics altogether. So let us stop the class here. We can discuss issues like measurement aspects of trade in value added and how to measure it in the future lecture.